The cold afternoon dragged on in New York City as the sharp wind swept through the streets of Hope Street, a place that had long become a symbol of despair and forgotten lives. Barron Trump sat in the back seat of his black Tesla Model X, the soft hum of the car's engine doing little to ease the storm in his mind. Lost in thought, his gaze drifted to the streets, the gray buildings casting long shadows on the broken pavement. Amid the chaos, something caught his eye. Between the makeshift tents and faces marked by hardship, a woman sat hunched over, wrapped in a torn wool shawl. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, something that stirred memories buried deep within his heart. At first, he couldn't place the feeling. It was uncomfortable, almost painful, as if a distant echo of the past was calling to him. He frowned, trying to understand why his chest tightened as he watched her struggle to keep the shawl around her trembling frame. Life has a way of reminding us how fragile it truly is, he thought. One moment we stand tall, the next we are at the mercy of a cruel twist of fate. Barron knew this truth, but he had never seen it so clearly until now. He turned away, hoping to shake the unease, but the image of her frail figure lingered, her sunken eyes, her hollowed cheeks. They spoke of a life that had been drained of hope. And then it struck him like a thunderbolt. His breath hitched as recognition dawned. It was Miss Parker, the woman who had taught him to read, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did, his childhood teacher. How could this be? How could someone so noble, so dedicated to shaping young minds, end up here in this unforgiving place? The realization was a punch to the gut, and Barron felt an ache he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was an indictment of a society that had turned its back on the very people who had built its foundations. The car slowed at a red light, and Barron leaned forward, his heart pounding. His mind raced as he watched her struggle against the biting cold, her thin fingers clutching the shawl that barely shielded her from the wind. A voice inside him urged him to keep driving, to return to the comfort of his routine. But another voice, louder and more insistent, refused to let him turn away. He couldn't ignore what was right in front of him. He wouldn't. Miss Parker had once lived a modest but fulfilling life in Brooklyn Heights, New York. Her days were spent in classrooms, shaping the minds of children with her warmth and wisdom. Every morning, she'd wake up early, prepare her lesson plans, and sip a strong cup of coffee. Teaching wasn't just a job for her. It was a calling, a chance to inspire and nurture dreams. She had been a beacon of hope for so many, including Barron. But life, like a merciless storm, had stripped her of everything she held dear. It started with an illness, a cruel diagnosis that forced her to leave the classroom she loved. Then came the sudden death of her husband, a loss so devastating it left her adrift. Her two children, once her pillars of support, slowly faded from her life, their promises of help dissolving into empty words. Desperate and alone, Miss Parker sold her home to cover mounting medical expenses, believing that at the very least she'd have her family to lean on. But as the months passed, their calls stopped. Excuses replaced assurances. She was left with nothing but silence. Homelessness wasn't something she had ever imagined for herself. At first, she stayed in a community shelter telling herself it was temporary. But life showed no mercy. The shelter was overcrowded, chaotic, and unsafe. Each night, she fought to survive, clutching a bag of her remaining belongings. Then, the final blow came. A flood swept through the community center, destroying everything she had left. Her documents, photos, and the last fragments of her identity. With nowhere else to turn, she ended up on Hope Street, a place where hope was the one thing no one could afford. The nights were the worst. The biting cold seeped through her thin clothes, and the ground she slept on was a mixture of dirt and broken glass. Violence was a constant threat. She tried to hold on to her dignity, avoiding eye contact and wearing the least tattered clothes she had. But over time, even that faded. People passed by without a second glance, their indifference cutting deeper than the cold. She had become invisible, a shadow in a city that never stopped moving. Hunger gnawed at her insides, and shame became a daily companion. She scavenged for food in trash cans, the humiliation of that first time still fresh in her mind. Yet survival left no room for pride. The world had forgotten her, and she began to wonder if she even existed anymore. But today, something was different. Barron Trump's car came to a stop, and he stepped out, each step toward her heavier than the last. His heart raced as he approached her, unsure of what to say, unsure if she'd even recognize him. When he finally stood before her, he spoke softly, his voice trembling with emotion. "Miss Parker." The woman looked up slowly, her sunken eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was no recognition, but then, like a spark reigniting a dying flame, her eyes widened. "Barron," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears welled up in her eyes as she instinctively tried to hide her hands, to smooth her disheveled hair. Shame washed over her, but Barron didn't flinch. He saw her, truly saw her, and the weight of her suffering filled him with a determination he hadn't felt before. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. She hesitated, fear and disbelief warring in her eyes. But when he extended his hand, something inside her shifted. Exhaustion overpowered doubt, and she placed her trembling hand in his. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of human kindness. Barron led her to his car, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. He could see the frailty in her movements, the way life had worn her down. As they drove, he finally broke the silence. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Parker took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the passing streets. She told him everything: the illness, the loss, the betrayal, and the relentless descent into despair. Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. Barron listened, his chest tightening with every word. He couldn't accept that this was how her story would end. When they arrived at the Grand Manhattan Hotel, Miss Parker looked around in confusion. She hesitated at the entrance, her worn shoes and tattered clothes a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. "Why are we here?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Because you deserve better," Barron said simply, guiding her inside. He booked the best available room, ensuring she had a hot meal, a warm bed, and a moment of peace. As she stepped into the room, Tears streamed down her face. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Barron smiled, his own eyes glistening. "Because you never gave up on me. Now it's my turn." For the first time in years, Miss Parker felt something she thought she had lost forever: dignity. And as Barron began making calls to lawyers, doctors, and social workers, he knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't just giving her a night of comfort. He was giving her a chance to rebuild her life. What do you think about this act of compassion? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where kindness changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else to take that first step toward helping another. Together, we can create a ripple effect of hope. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of the hotel room, bathing it in a soft golden glow. For a moment, Miss Parker didn't move, unsure if she was still dreaming. The feel of the clean sheets, the warmth of the mattress, and the quiet hum of the city outside, all of it felt surreal. She hadn't experienced such peace in years. Slowly she sat up, her frail body trembling slightly, and glanced around the room. It was real. She wasn't on the cold streets of Hope Street anymore. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Miss Parker, it's me," Barron's voice came through. She opened the door cautiously, her eyes meeting his. In his hands was a tray with breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and a glass of orange juice. The aroma filled the air, making her stomach twist with hunger. "I thought you could use a good meal," he said gently, placing the tray on the small table by the window. Ms. Parker's lips quivered as she sat down, tears threatening to spill once more. She took a small bite, the taste bringing back memories of better days. Barron watched her, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He knew this was just the start of her recovery, but seeing her eat, seeing a faint glimmer of life return to her eyes, filled him with determination. As the days passed, Barron remained by her side, tirelessly working to ensure she had everything she needed. He arranged medical appointments to address her health issues and met with social workers to secure stable housing for her. But more than that, he listened. Each time she shared a piece of her story, the pain she'd carried alone for so long seemed to lessen, even if only slightly. One evening, as they sat in the quiet hotel room, Ms. Parker finally spoke the words she'd been holding back. "Why me, Barron? There are so many others out there. Why did you stop for me?" Barron's gaze softened. "Because you're not just anyone. You're the person who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You taught me to see beyond what's in front of me, to look for the story behind every face. I couldn't just leave you there. You gave me hope when I needed it most. It's only right that I do the same for you." Her tears fell freely now, each one carrying years of pain and gratitude. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for a future where she could stand tall again. Barron's next steps were bolder. He used his resources to connect her with a community program called Bright Futures Education Initiative. The program helped people rebuild their lives by offering them opportunities to share their skills and experiences. When Ms. Parker stepped into a classroom once more, holding a whiteboard marker instead of a piece of chalk, she felt a part of herself come alive again. Her first day back as a teacher was emotional. The children, wide-eyed and eager, listened intently as she shared stories and lessons. Each smile, each curious question, reminded her of why she had chosen this path so many years ago. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Barron visited her often, watching her transformation with quiet pride. Ms. Parker wasn't just his teacher anymore. She was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and compassion. Have you ever seen a life transformed by a single act of kindness? Let us know in the comments below. Stories like this remind us of the power we all hold to make a difference. Together, we can create a world filled with hope and second chances. Months passed since Barron Trump first found Ms. Parker on the streets of Hope Street. The transformation that followed was nothing short of remarkable. Ms. Parker, once a shadow of herself, was now a beacon of resilience, a story of redemption that inspired everyone around her. But the road to this point had been anything but easy. Barron had spared no effort in helping her rebuild her life. He had secured her a place to stay, set up medical appointments, and ensured she was surrounded by people who cared. But beyond the logistics, it was his unwavering belief in her that had made the biggest impact. For the first time in years, Ms. Parker felt like she mattered. One crisp autumn morning, Barron arrived at Bright Futures Education Initiative to check on Ms. Parker. The community program had become her sanctuary, a place where she rediscovered her purpose. As he entered the building, the sound of children laughing and the faint hum of a lesson being taught filled the air. He followed the noise to a small classroom where Ms. Parker stood at the front, a whiteboard marker in hand. The children watched her intently as she explained a math problem, her voice calm and confident. Barron leaned against the doorframe, a smile tugging at his lips. She was glowing, her presence commanding the room just as it had years ago when she taught him. After the lesson ended, Ms. Parker noticed Barron and waved him in. The children's faces lit up as they recognized him. "Is that your friend?" one of them asked. Ms. Parker chuckled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Yes, this is Mr. Trump. He's someone who reminds me every day that kindness changes everything." As the children dispersed for lunch, Ms. Parker turned to Barron. "I can't thank you enough for this," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "These children, they've given me a reason to keep going." Barron nodded, his gaze steady. "You gave me the same gift once. I'm just returning the favor." The conversation drifted to the past, to memories of the classroom where Ms. Parker had first inspired him. Barron recounted how her encouragement had shaped him, how her belief in his potential had been a lifeline during difficult times. She listened intently, tears brimming in her eyes. "You always had it in you," she said softly. "I just helped you see it." Later that evening, Ms. Parker received an invitation to speak at a local event celebrating educators who had made a difference in their communities. The invitation was unexpected, but Barron encouraged her. to accept. "Your story needs to be heard," he said. "It's proof that no matter how far someone falls, they can rise again." The night of the event was filled with anticipation. Ms. Parker, dressed in a modest but elegant outfit, stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly. Barron stood beside her, his presence a steadying force. "You'll do great," he assured her. When her name was announced, the applause was deafening. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating her face. For a moment, she stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing on her. Then she began to speak. "I never imagined I'd be standing here," she started, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "A year ago, I was lost. I had nothing, no home, no family, no hope. But one act of kindness changed everything." She shared her story, the struggles she had endured, and the kindness that had pulled her back from the brink. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Tears streamed down faces as she spoke of the children she now taught, of how they reminded her every day of the power of hope. "And to the person who made all of this possible," she said, her voice breaking slightly as she looked toward Barron in the audience. "Thank you for reminding me that I mattered when I had forgotten myself. You gave me back my life, my purpose, and for that I will always be grateful." The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Barron's chest swelled with pride, but more than that, with a deep sense of fulfillment. As the event ended, Ms. Parker and Barron stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city lights glittered like stars, and the hum of life buzzed softly around them. She turned to him, her face lit with a smile that carried years of gratitude. "You saved me," she said simply. Barron shook his head. "No, Miss Parker, you saved yourself. I just reminded you of what you were capable of." The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unspoken settling between them. Then, with a soft laugh, Miss Parker said, "Barron, you've got a good heart. Don't let the world ever change that." He smiled, the warmth of her words settling deep in his soul. "I won't," he promised. As they parted ways, Barron watched her disappear into the glow of the city, her figure strong and purposeful. Hope Street was far behind her now. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. And for Barron, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward, changing not just one life, but countless others. What about you? Have you ever seen kindness transform a life? Share your stories in the comments below, and let's spread the message of hope together.